Hi, this is the Cat's Library. I'll be your librarian today. This episode was a journey. I originally intended for this to be mostly a drawing challenge with the story as a kind of background, and then my mom was like, "You can do better with the story stuff. Where are your descriptions? I want to feel like I'm actually there." And I was like, yes, I can put more effort into the writing. So this is why I finished what was supposed to be a month-long drawing challenge 6 months late. Engage! Macaque Chuck was the host of the biggest talk show in the Sea Dragon world, which basically doubled as the news. He ran a tight ship with no surprises. And when he saw Alani standing just off stage with a tense smile, his heart went cold. Ari and Anton were also there. The live studio audience didn't seem to notice the host's sudden freeze, but the playwright who he was interviewing swallowed and almost commented on it before Mac regained his composure. "I'm sorry about that. It appears that Alani Hoshi has risked breaking my restraining order to be here, and she has brought one of her human friends 1 day early. And some guy. Would you five people be amused if they were to come onto the stage and have a bit of an interview themselves right now?" Most of the crowd cheered with an enthusiastic and yet also confused manner, while a few people booed. Ari followed Alani and Anton out onto the stage awkwardly as she waved like a professional celebrity to the crowd. "Why does Mac have a restraining order against you?" he asked. "Don't ask questions you don't want answers to." "Why do I need to be here?" "Because you're new and cool, which means that some of these people are more likely to listen than to a professional." She sat down on the couch beside the playwright. Since sea dragons were so large, there was enough room for Ari to sit down next to her. However, the playwright had to scoot over when Anton slithered between them, since Anton was big for a sea dragon. Max smiled automatically. Ari went over everything that they needed to say in his head. Alani and Anton finished giving the introduction. "And now Dr. Ari Zlatnik will go over my plan for our deliverance. Ready, Ari?" Ari took a deep breath and launched into his speech. "Many of you at home may have been wondering about the force field around the city. Our sources tell us that the Emperor and his council have enacted this. They fled the city and enacted the digital order for the vents to the dam to be fully opened in the hopes of flooding the city. Every high-ranking dam worker but one, that being Anton Aqueous, has been evacuated. Luckily, Lady Alani's plan to temporarily portal the city to a remote location in the desert until the water subsides is manageable. The first step is to divert the main power grid to the portal machine to sustain the amount of energy needed to encompass the magnitude that the portal will have to be. This will result in a blackout. In order to return the city to its previous location, the second step of the plan is to relocate the cliffside solar panels to the city. The naturally abundant light of the desert will recharge these faster than teleporting to the tundra, ocean, or other open space. You, the populace of Sea Folk City, may want to be indoors or in a bunker under heavy furniture, such as a table, desk, or bed that is unlikely to move should this process give way to turbulence. All who need electricity to maintain life are strongly advised to acquire a generator in the next 40 minutes, which can be accomplished with the assistance of the Star Searcher Secret Society Club. Are there any questions?" The metallic industrial maze of the power plant twisted and turned before Mike and Sarah. He saw her start to sign something out of the corner of his eye. "I told you I don't need any of your magic craziness to tell me where to go," Mike said. Sarah's glass filled with unappealing images and distorted versions of Mike's face. "Oh, don't be so dramatic. Isn't Dahlia always going on about how life is a journey of saccharine cheerfulness or some such nonsense? So enjoy the journey and stop complaining, you supercilious pile of burnt sand." "Supercilious means pompous, not supercilly," Sarah sighed. "Yes, that's how I meant it," he replied. Sarah went absolutely still for a moment, and then began trembling in anger. The green veins showed so prominently on his face and hands that even a dragon with next to no knowledge of human physiology would wince. Sarah turned suddenly around and headed off in the opposite direction. Fine, be like that. The less the merrier. Mike spun around and stormed down the hall. Every vein in Mike's body throbbed with pain. He punched the wall, shook out his hand, and charged forward again. It didn't matter if he got lost. The glassman was probably already there, with the power properly siphoned, laughing at him. He only managed to get captured/arrested twice in 2 days. His diplomatic skills had done nothing but fail him. And even if he did manage to find his stupid baseball bat again, it wouldn't work because the forest dragons had overcome his hypnosis. He should have stayed home for this mission. The whites of his eyes began to turn a vibrant neon green, and his fingernails twitched. He was practically running aimlessly around the compound at this point. Mike wasn't sure how long he'd been wandering when he barged into the control room where he needed to be. It was crowded with guards, scientists, and power plant operators. They all turned in the human's direction as he came in, and many pointed weapons. Mike growled under his breath. He adjusted the knob on his translation headset that he had borrowed from Raffi and Tayo, which was code for he used their breach of orders to blackmail them into giving him one of their devices. I'm here for your electricity, Mike said. My friends explained this on the Macaque Jack show, or whatever. He took a step forward and the guards set their stun blasters to a harsh electric buzz. He stopped and ground his teeth. You really don't want to mess with me today? The sea dragons startled slightly, and a green reflection flashed in their eyes for a second. As the reflection dissipated, the myriad of faces collectively scrunched into a scowl, and many of the giants began to leap toward Mike. The green veins began to pulse again, but it felt more like freezing water on a warm day than actual pain. He looked down at his hands, and the corner of his mouth twitched up in a quick, aggressive smile. If I were you, I would want to be helpful stopping the city from getting flooded instead of allowing it to happen. The power plant workers paused a little longer this time, but did eventually revert back to antagonism. One of them even sent a warning shot past Mike's head to the wall behind him. Mike stood up straighter and looked them individually in the eye. The Emperor has left the city. We need to turn off the force field, we need to turn off the portal interference, and we need to divert power to a new portal so that we can survive the next hour. Your survival depends on helping me right now. The dragons lowered their weapons and stepped aside. Mike came forward to the main controls and with his limited amount of knowledge on the sea dragon language, managed to find the all power button and divert it to the one portal in the old castle. After he was done, he had the distinct feeling he was being watched. In the doorway, Sarah gave him a thumbs up. In her other hand, she held his baseball bat, except it wasn't green anymore, but a desaturated gray. Mike gave her a stoic nod. About the same time Mike and his team entered the power station, Dahlia, Harper, and Zell were almost to the dock when Harper stopped in the alleyway. Zell's frill ruffled as a broken gutter doused her. It was raining, but the force field stopped any of the water from hitting the ground. Ironic. Come on, kid. End of the world nonsense going on right now. We can't afford to hesitate, or whatever this is. Zell snapped in exasperation. Dahlia swallowed. I mean, you don't have to come if you don't want to. Oh, come on, human. Where's the backbone you showed earlier? The human closed her eyes, sighed, and then leaned down next to the young swamp dragon, who was wringing his hands. What's wrong? Why doesn't my dad want to see me? If he wants to be left alone, I think that we should try to find a different boatman to help us. Either that or you're right, and I shouldn't come. Dahlia paused again to formulate her words, and Zell rolled her eyes. Dahlia began to speak. In my experience, one of you need to take the first step. I have a problem with my temper sometimes, but I don't like conflict. So when I was very young, I learned to bottle up my emotions so that other people didn't have to deal with them. However, when I was in my late teens, I began to hold different views than my parents about certain things. At first it was small things, but eventually I learned that we had fundamentally different ideas about God and what makes life meaningful. We got into one or two arguments, which ended with no one satisfied, and so I left one day, without saying goodbye or telling anyone where I was going. When I got married to Ari, he made me try to invite them, but they had moved, and I couldn't find their forwarding address in time. It's probably the cruelest thing that I've ever done. She gently held the boy's chin in her hand. Don't make the same mistake that I did. You'll regret it for the rest of your life. And this may be your only chance. Okay? Harper's voice came out dry and hollow, but he did manage to stiffly march out into the open toward the boats. According to the paper files that Zell had managed to snag from the main office, Mr. Harper's dad had the afternoon and night shift when it came to managing the flying boats. He not only worked as a mechanic, but was also one of the dragons who drove an ambulance to the hospital. If no one was at the dock, they'd been planning on taking a vehicle to gather the solar panels from the cliffs, even though Zell only had a learner's permit. Harper's dad was there, though. He was on the roof of the ambulance boat, adjusting a sensor that had prevented the boat from running into vertical objects, much the same way that the hover dollies had. As Dahlia, Zell, and most importantly Harper came out into the open, the swamp dragon froze. His mouth twitched into a smile, and then he swallowed. His frill puffed up and then smoothed flat against his back in a moment. He quickly glanced down at the ground and then slid down the ladder. The majority of the boat was between him and the party, but he leaned forward as if he couldn't decide what he wanted. Harper walked stiffly and yet steadily toward the boat, following the sound of Dahlia beside him, trying not to limp. However, as he got nearer, the stiffness increased, and he slowed to a halt as if his physical body couldn't move anymore. Dahlia could see that he was shaking, almost imperceptibly. Hey, Dad. Before he could say anything else, his father raced forward and wrapped him in an embrace. Harper hugged him back as hard as he could. They muttered some things to each other in the swamp dragon language. Zell wiped a tear from her eye and then turned to Dahlia. The human woman had her lips turned up in a tense and unmoving smile, while her eyes and cheeks glistened with her crying. Cutting very close to the deadline after Dahlia reunited Harper with his dad and later retrieved the solar panels, Mike learned how to use his newfound powers and successfully siphon the power, and Ari and Alani warned the populace. They all met up in the capital in the basement. Mariangela was the last through the door. Alani clapped her hands to get everyone's attention. Okay, Glassman. What name are you going by today, Sarah? We're cutting it a bit close, so run the calculations if you please. Sarah began running the calculations while she signed. Calling me Mariangela is fine. Alani looked to Dahlia and then Mike. What's up with that? Mike playfully rolled his eyes. He had been smiling since he got back. As soon as you get comfortable with a name, she changes it. Likes to keep people on her toes, that one. Ah. Alani gave the group a more careful evaluation. Mike and Mariangela seemed to be in good spirits. It was hard to tell with Mariangela, though. For once, Dahlia and Ari were too stuck in their heads to give a proper greeting to each other. Ari was busy familiarizing himself with the alien portal device, intensely focused, since she had told him that he could operate it. Mariangela, Mike, or Alani herself probably would have been more experienced at managing the portal, but Ari really wanted to do it. Dahlia stood in the corner with her arms crossed, deep in thought, and thoroughly unfocused. Alani leaned against the wall next to her. Hey, Space Cadet, what's up? Dahlia looked back at her, but it took a minute to register what was said. Nothing. I'm fine. Just need some time to work some stuff out. Alright, just speak up if you need anything. Mariangela finally finished her calculations and walked over to Ari. Okay, ready. He grabbed a lever and pulled it down. The whole city shook slightly as it went through the portal. Dahlia absentmindedly put a hand on the wall for balance, but everyone else stayed on their feet, even Mariangela. There was one final jolt as the power cut out. The scanner showed that a border curb from the underwater part of the city was clipped off in the portal, and Ari winced. The underwater city would have been crushed by the water pressure, and as the sea dragons were marine mammals, they still needed air to live. Ari pushed a few buttons to begin converting to the solar panels. The scout team all cheered with various degrees of enthusiasm, but all with sincerity. Ari was the most enthusiastic, while Mariangela was the least. Ari finally came over to Dolly and wrapped an arm around her, and she lay her head on his shoulder. They didn't get long to rest, however, as the walkie-talkie buzzed. Mike answered it. Mariangela picked up his backpack. Hello? Hey, this is Kuzi. We're in the desert as planned, and everyone appears to be well, but there's something else out here. Before she finished speaking, Mariangela had a mini portal up, which she left open after she passed through. Mary! Mike called after her and then turned back to his walkie-talkie. Sorry, bud, we gotta go. He turned it off and followed after her. Ori and Dahlia also went through the portal into the desert. The distance from the horizon line to about 10 feet in front of them was covered in the haze of heat waves. The sand was interrupted by giant stone plateaus, mesas, and buttes. A gigantic cactus with multiple branches towered into something that looked like a forest in the distance. Coincidentally, their portal hung from a smaller cactus in the middle of a sandy patch. Sea Dragon City was almost overlapped with the local oasis to the point that a few of the palm tree-looking plants were bent over by a few of the buildings. A group of black, red, and brown dragons slowly approached the brilliantly sparkling glassmen with spears in hand. A few of them in the back even had some crew bow and arrows. It was new technology for them. Mariangela rifled through the pack even as the tribe's warriors and/or hunters edged even closer. She signaled at them to stop, and they did so in confusion of her confident posture. Out of the bag came the coffee mug that Mike had accidentally brought with them early on in the adventure. Mariangela held it out to the closest warrior, who took it and sniffed it. The warrior clutched it close to her chest, bowed to the glassmen, who somehow communicated through their hand signs and hieroglyphics. The others in the group also bowed and then came forward more in curiosity than fear. The humans soon joined to meet them, and before long their dragon friends from the journey also joined to meet these newcomers. One thing led to another, and the sea dragons and the desert dragons and all of the neighboring tribes began to have an impromptu party that devolved into lunch and lasted into the early evening. Many from the Sea Dragon City considered staying there, but the majority of the remaining leaders voted to continue with the plan to go back to the city. Modern codebreakers had very little information about the desert dragons except for a few sketches in Ari's notes. They did know that Kuzi was among the ones to stay. She had a tearful goodbye with Anton and the rest of the Star Searchers before starting an apprenticeship with a desert tapestry weaver. It can be deduced that it was much more respected art form there. Anton decided to go back and remake the dam to not have a kill switch. Tayo and Raffi officially became boyfriend-girlfriend and decided that they wanted to see more of the world without worrying about following orders. Zell got cornered by the highest-ranking council member who hadn't left with the Emperor and promised that she would hunt him down. After escorting Harper and his dad home and getting permission from her queen, of course, the Swamp Dragons and the Bog Woman sort of hit it off. Like, they really hit it off. Near the end of the party, Ari suddenly said, "Hey, has anyone seen Alani?" Dahlia frowned. I haven't seen her since we went through the portal." Mike turned toward Mariangela. "Are you gonna tell us, or are you gonna make us look around until we find her?" She gestured for them to follow and weaved through the crowd until they reached the still open portal to the portal room. She mimed rapping her knuckles against the control panel. When Ari looked through the command history, it was clear that the second portal had been opened to the Aether shortly after they had left, which had closed after Alani. She had gone to be with her fiancé without saying goodbye. "Well," Mike said, "we've only known her for a little over a week. It was a bit rude of her. But I guess we didn't mean that much to her." Dahlia broke down into tears and Ari held her awkwardly. "I want to find my parents," she sobbed. Ari paused for a moment. "I already promised that I'd join the council as an impartial." Dahlia glared at him. But I can help you sort this out first." She smiled through her tears and hugged him tighter while burying her face in his chest. Ari shifted his weight. Mike, Glassman, Do you guys want to come with us? Or maybe stay here to help the sea people rebuild their civilization? Mariangela signed no. Then she showed some images of her and Mike going on an adventure, figuring out the mystery behind Mike's dad's mainframe face. This was showcased in the Mike redesign video. Yeah, sorry buddy, said Mike. That sounds much more interesting. Maybe the Codebreakers could send someone else to take your place?